If you saw a waitress sneaking a bite of a sandwich from the trash, would you think she's a thief or a victim of the very place she works for? In less than 10 days, a CEO walked away from his million-dollar office and disguised himself as a kitchen worker to uncover why the most successful branch of his restaurant chain had suddenly become the one everyone was silently walking away from. What he found wasn't just about poor performance or financial loss. It was something far worse, a system quietly crushing its kindest employees without anyone noticing. This isn't some corporate fairy tale. This is a breaking story about the right to be treated with dignity, even if your job is washing dishes in the back. Watch until the end to see how a sandwich pulled from a trash bin exposed a toxic manager, and how a waitress once starved by her own workplace is now rewriting the culture of an entire restaurant empire. And finally, from a leadership perspective, the biggest lesson here isn't about who got fired. It's about something far more fundamental. If you want to retain good people, start with offering them a decent meal. If you believe kindness deserves recognition, please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who's ever felt invisible in their own job. Because sometimes, a discarded sandwich is all it takes for someone to remember they still matter. The early March wind wasn't strong enough to sweep away the lingering cold that clung to the small town of Maple Hill, Ohio, but it was enough to sway the worn-out sign hanging loosely in front of a roadside diner. Against the peeling paint, the words Rusty Fork Diner, a family place since 1982, still held on to their meaning, as if time itself had been paused. Beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, an old pickup truck sat motionless, engine long since shut off. Inside, Damian Cross sat still, one hand resting gently on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed through the foggy windshield on the diner's kitchen window, the only place still flickering with light. It wasn't exactly hope, more like the dying glow of a flame gasping for air. The scratched silver ring on his finger was still as cold as the day his father last took it off and set it on the counter, back when the first Rusty Fork location opened its doors. It wasn't the passing of an empire. It was a passing of memory, an unspoken message. Never let a place that serves food become a place people fear walking into. Damien had lived by that message for 2 decades, until now. Rusty Fork was no longer the place he once proudly called his own. What started as a humble family diner on a highway had grown into a 27-branch chain across the Midwest. But over the past 12 months, things had begun to fall apart. Cold, impersonal emails from HR, sudden resignations without a word, negative reviews from once loyal customers spreading across social media. Damien had initially dismissed it as a seasonal transition, just as the regional director had suggested. But the numbers didn't lie, and his gut, the same instinct that had once helped him dodge 2 bankruptcies, was telling him this time, something is rotting from the inside. He used to believe a good CEO trusted the system, trusted the data, the reports. But no spreadsheet could tell him why servers were quitting after just 3 weeks, why line cooks no longer volunteered for extra shifts, why tips mysteriously disappeared from their paychecks every month. There was no metric for measuring silence. Damien needed the truth, but the truth didn't sit in conference rooms. It wore grease-stained aprons, scuffed non-slip shoes, and pushed food carts through greasy hallways. And that's why he was here now. Not as CEO Damian Cross, but as Danny Cruz, an out-of-work cook who had just moved to Maple Hill, willing to take whatever job would pay next month's rent. A week-old patchy beard, thrift store clothes, worn-out sneakers, and 3 fake resumes printed on a cheap home printer. His whole appearance reeked of gas and dust, the smell of someone no one would pay attention to. He had even changed his voice, deeper, more broken, like a man who had just come off a construction site. More than anyone, Damien understood. If he wanted to get to the root of the problem, he had to completely vanish from his own identity. No CEO, no founder, no one with the power to fire or fix. Just a stranger's name in a once familiar place to find out what Rusty Fork really was when no one knew he was watching. An empty soda cup rolled across the parking lot and tapped softly against his tire. The tiny plastic thud startled him. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, Memories from the early mornings of 2003 came flooding back. Him and his father waking at 4 a.m., firing up the propane stove in their food truck, standing in the rain grilling sausage for rushed construction workers. They used to laugh because his dad always tucked in an extra slice of cheese. "Every slice of cheese is a thank you," he used to say. And now, one of Rusty Fork's branches had just been hit with a one-star review. "Rude service, kitchen's dirtier than a chicken coop." Those words stabbed at Damien, because they weren't wrong. He opened the truck door. The wind cut like stone. He stepped out, pulled his hoodie over his head, hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. The ground beneath his shoes was hard as concrete. The diner door wasn't locked, only left ajar. Something he would have fired someone over a year ago. But tonight, he simply nudged it open and walked in, into a place that once bore his name, now a stranger's territory. No one looked up as he passed, not a single glance. He was a shadow in the world he had built. The scent of burnt oil, diluted bleach failing to cover mildew, and stale overnight coffee hit his nose. Every step stuck to the floor, each squelch a tiny act of protest. Damien passed the cashier's counter, once home to a small flower vase placed weekly by a janitor, now just a dust-ringed memory. A ceiling fan creaked overhead, too weak to stir anything except disappointment. At the last booth, a forgotten receipt fluttered gently in the breeze from the back door. On the floor, a spoon lay tilted, as if someone had bent to pick it up, then gave up. Every corner of the room whispered, without words, what this place once was and what it was slowly becoming. Behind the bar stood the metal door leading into the kitchen. Damien paused. He had passed through that door hundreds of times before, as head chef during surprise inspections while demonstrating new menu items, but never like this. Never with the feeling he was about to walk into a furnace that would burn away the last traces of his own soul. He knocked 3 times, just as protocol dictated, then pushed the door open. The smell of burnt food, steel, sweat, and something unmistakably human rushed up to meet him. Everything was about to begin, and if something was truly rotting inside Rusty Fork, Damien would put his hand directly on it, not from an office, but from the kitchen floor, where the truth never makes it into a report. Behind the steel door that led into the kitchen, Damien Cross, now going by the name Danny Cruz, didn't walk into a restaurant. He stepped into a fracture in the system, a place where neglect had seeped into every tile, every footstep, and every glance of the people who merely existed there. The first thing he inhaled wasn't food. It was a dizzying mix of burnt grease, stale coffee, and a cold draft that felt like it came from a dying freezer wheezing in the corner. The floor was slick with moisture, stained with spirals of cooking oil that looked like a child's scribbles. But no child had ever been taught here. A broken mop lay abandoned near the trash bin, its handle snapped, its bristles matted as if it had been used to wipe up blood instead of grease. Damien walked past a soda fountain with a busted spout, the base wrapped clumsily in electrical tape, like a patient who had received half-finished first aid. On the bar counter sat an open pizza box from the night before. 3 leftover slices hardened into crusty slabs, one of them bitten and tossed aside. A work schedule clung to the wall, scrawled in faded dry erase marker. The ink had smudged into streaks like old tears, names scratched out, rewritten, then scratched again. Over and over, like the lives they belonged to. At the hostess stand, a young woman in a faded beige polo slouched against the wall, one leg slung over a folding chair, thumb scrolling through her phone as if watching a series, though her eyes held no light. Damien stood for a few seconds, waiting for a glance, a greeting, any reaction to his presence. Nothing. Only when he cleared his throat softly did she mutter, eyes still glued to her screen, "Manager's in the back. Go through the left kitchen, then hang a right." Her tone wasn't guidance. It was an invitation for him to disappear. Damien nodded, saying nothing. The sensation of being unseen, something he had never experienced in his life, now slid beneath his thrift store hoodie and unshaved beard. And there was something suffocating about it, but also necessary. This was the only way to see what no report would ever reveal. He passed through the dining area, once dressed in red and white Italian-style tablecloths, now just bare, battered wood. The tabletops were sticky, like syrup had spilled a week ago, and no one had cared. Plastic chairs leaned at odd angles, some missing cushions, others stamped with shoe prints like they'd been used to move crates instead of seat customers. On a table near the window, a forgotten receipt curled in the breeze, seeping through a cracked pane. In the middle of the aisle stood a mop bucket, the water inside black as coal, reeking of bleach mixed with something unnameable, like the place's collective disappointment had melted into it. Damien sidestepped it carefully, eyes scanning the room as if remapping a version of his past. Not this place, but something this place had once been part of. Something he used to call pride. A sharp metallic crash rang out from behind the kitchen door, heavy and jarring. A string of muttered profanity followed, words you'd never find in any employee handbook. Damien pushed the door open and stepped in. The kitchen was its own world, chaotic, hot, and drained of hope. A prep cook struggled to rinse vegetables under a faucet that trickled like tears, one hand waving at flies. A line cook stood at the grill, wincing every time he flipped meat, his wrist likely injured. But no one stepped in. No one asked. In one corner stood the employee fridge, its door propped open with a cast iron skillet, as if no one bothered fixing it anymore. Inside, Damien spotted an open carton of milk, a wilted bag of salad, and a half-eaten sandwich tossed among spilled ketchup packets. Nothing was labeled. Nothing was claimed. Nothing was kept. He walked toward the office door, its employees-only sign hanging crookedly, the hinges screeching like a complaint no one listened to. He knocked 3 times following protocol. No response. He opened the door and stepped inside. There sat Trent Walker, the night shift manager, the man responsible for keeping things running. He was leaned back in a swivel chair, feet on the desk, chewing a toothpick with a look that said he was used to being interrupted, and too tired to care. The office was the perfect picture of apathy. An uncovered lunch tray, a cold coffee cup set on unpaid invoices, and an old computer blinking with system errors. Damien held out his resume. Danny Cruz, applying for the line cook position. Trent looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, flipped through the first couple of pages, then tossed them onto a stack of paperwork stained with mayonnaise. Can you fry? Enough not to burn down the kitchen, Damien answered, voice steady. Start tomorrow. $10 an hour. Don't be late. And if you spill something, you pay for it. I don't have time for drama. No ID check, no follow-up questions, no second glance. Just a smirk like he just interviewed a mop. What welled up inside Damien wasn't outrage at being dismissed. It was heartbreak, because the system he had built was now hiring people with just 3 sentences. If that's how it starts, what does it lead to? He nodded. I'll be there. Then turned quietly to leave, Trent already lost in his phone, his eyes slipping past Damien as if he'd never existed. The office door clicked shut, softly, but inside Damien, it rang like the cocking of a gun. No one looked at him as he walked back through the kitchen. No one asked his name. No one asked if he'd been interviewed. No one cared. He, once the man whose portrait hung in the company's main hall, was now just the new guy no one bothered to see. And that was exactly what he needed. The truth, not dressed up, not edited, just raw and unfiltered, the kind that only shows itself when no one thinks they're being watched. The real fight would start tomorrow. But in that very moment, Damien already knew. He wasn't just facing a lazy manager or a filthy kitchen. He was up against a dying operating philosophy, gasping its last breaths in silence. It was still dark when Damien returned to Rusty Fork. The Ohio sky was ink blue, smudged like blotting paper soaked through, and dew still clung to the windshields of the cars parked outside the diner. The storefront was drenched in night mist, the sign flickering intermittently, and the kitchen light looked like a small flame, trying to hold back the cold darkness pressing in. But inside there was no warmth, only the sound of oil boiling, utensils clashing against metal, and the heavy footsteps scraping across grease-slicked tiles. Damien stepped through the door, still wearing the same faded gray t-shirt from the night before. Worn-out jeans, a low-pulled cap, and shoes so thin-soled he could feel every pebble beneath his feet. He hadn't eaten, and he didn't plan to. Not because of fasting or pride, but to understand. To understand what hunger did to your body when you had to work. To feel the cling of fryer oil on your clothes when you couldn't afford detergent. To experience exactly what the people he used to manage from afar had been enduring all along. The moment he stepped in, the door to the back kitchen swung open, and the sound from within roared out, not like a beast, but like a system running on despair. Every sizzle from the grill felt like a gasp for breath. Every clatter of metal rang like a groan. The order printer spat out tickets nonstop, receipts spilling like blood from a wound that never scabbed over. No one spoke. No one greeted him. Everyone moved on autopilot, like rusted gears in a machine too old to care. Damien was handed a pile of blackened frying pans and a stiff bristled scrub brush from a discount store. He sat down and started scraping away the dried grease, sticky like wet cement, while a harsh cleaner stung his eyes. Under the jaundiced kitchen lights, dust floated in the air like summer gnats. Not painful, but maddening enough to drive a man insane. He worked without pause. No one told him what to do. No one cared if he stopped, but no one helped either. Everyone was locked in their own battle, with exhaustion, with heat, with doubt. A young cook at the grill, known only as Luis Vega, winced every time he flipped a burger, clearly nursing an injured wrist. Each time he gritted his teeth, not out of passion for the food, but out of bone-deep resignation. No one asked what was wrong. No one stepped in. Only Damien, the stranger in their midst, noticed. A prep cook was slicing tomatoes, sleeves soaked with sweat, face flushed bright red. No air conditioning, no fans, no scheduled breaks. The boy wiped his face with the hem of his shirt as he worked. Damien saw the knife slip once, a thin line of blood beating on his finger. There was no cry, just a bandage and a continuation, as if pain didn't matter unless it spilled loudly enough to interrupt production. At the center of the chaos moved Dana Kim, the only shift leader who still seemed to care. She darted between stations like a pinball, clipboard in hand, voice low but urgent. Her shirt was wrinkled, her hair falling to one side where the tie had slipped, her body thin but filled with a stubborn fire. She didn't shout. She gestured, and most of the staff followed. But in the rare, quiet seconds between orders, her eyes betrayed it. She was holding something together that had already started to fall apart, with shaking hands and sheer willpower. Meanwhile, Trent Walker stood near what could only be called a throne, the corner by the pass line where plates waited to be taken out to customers. His elbow leaned on the counter, gum popping in his mouth, eyes scanning like he was sizing up livestock instead of people. He didn't coordinate. He commanded. When he spotted a piece of toast a shade too dark, he barked, "Trying to kill someone, you idiot?" A dishwasher ducked his head and nodded. Every insult was a small, slicing blade into an already suffocating room. Damien kept his head down. No raised eyebrows, no clenched jaw, no retorts. Just silence, observation, memorization. Every behavior, every unnamed pain, every breath held behind gritted teeth. Mid-shift, when the intensity slightly dipped, Damien slipped out the back door. He didn't smoke, but he needed air, needed to flush the taste of fryer grease from his throat, needed to let his skin cool down, but mostly because he heard something. A voice, small, shaky, apologizing into a phone, a girl's voice, young. "I'll try. I'll send more this week, probably by Wednesday if the tips are good. Yes, Mom, don't worry. I still have food, I swear." Damien took a step back. Through the crack in the door, he saw the familiar slender frame. Rachel Monroe, the blonde waitress he'd noticed the day before. Her hand was clenched tightly around the phone, her cheek flushed, eyes cast down. She spoke like she was trying to reassure herself more than the person on the line, trying to believe things would be okay, even though she clearly knew they weren't. He didn't interrupt, didn't speak, just retreated inside, more silent than ever. And at that moment, Damien Cross, a man who once managed 27 branches, who once sat beside CFOs deciding quarterly growth, finally understood something. Reports could show him revenue, but they couldn't show him the blood seeping from a line cook's fingertips. Meetings could discuss efficiency, but no one ever talked about pain. At Rusty Fork, people weren't working anymore. They were surviving. They were enduring. They were doing the job like it was punishment from a past life. And all the while, he, the man who had built this system, had let it become exactly this. Her name was Rachel. But in this restaurant, no one called her that. They called her by table numbers, by rushed commands, by hand signals to grab plates, or by words like her, that one, or the kid. It wasn't always out of malice. Sometimes they didn't even look closely enough to register her face. No one asked where she was from, who she lived with, or why she pulled 3 night shifts a week. To them, she was just a thin blur, moving like a draft between the kitchen and the floor. Always on time, always quiet, always doing her job, and never memorable enough to matter. Damien noticed her not because she stood out, but because her silence made her invisible to everyone else. In a kitchen notorious for shouting and slamming plates, Rachel moved like a scene in slow motion. She didn't rush, but no one ever waited on her. She didn't complain, but every time she paused at the prep line for water or bread, her eyes would drift into a vague, vacant space, as if leaving this world for a split second. Her blonde hair was sometimes tied hastily with a rubber band, other times pinned back with a ballpoint pen. Her beige uniform had so many grease stains layered over each other that no one remembered what color it was originally. Her once white sneakers had faded to gray, heels worn down to the sole. But what Damien couldn't forget wasn't how she looked. It was her eyes. Not red, not teary, but tired, as if she had stayed up all winter holding on to a fragile hope that tomorrow wouldn't be worse than today. The first time he truly saw her was during a meltdown in the dining area. A wrong order, the head chef cursing through the headset, and an angry customer slapping the table. She walked straight into the chaos. No sighs, no heavy breaths, just calmly replaced the dish, bowed slightly, and walked away. No apologies. She knew that would only escalate the anger. No pleading glances. She knew no one would look back. Damien was standing at the back of the kitchen near the sink, hands in soapy water, eyes locked on her. And that's when he realized this place didn't need more managers. It needed someone who saw the people it had erased. That night, near the end of the shift, Rachel was still wiping down a table in the darkest corner. No customers left, but she kept scrubbing with steady, deliberate strokes, like the table's cleanliness could somehow clean something in her own mind. Damien was clearing dishes nearby, intentionally slowing down to watch. She wiped a clean spot again and again, eyes unfocused. Her lips were pressed tight. Her left hand clutched the rag until her knuckles went pale. Something was building up inside her, choking, like a sob too proud to be heard. Damien quietly asked, barely loud enough to register, "You okay?" Rachel startled, as if caught stealing. She stepped back half a pace, eyes wide, then lowered her head apologetically. "I'm sorry. I just missed a water spot." Her voice was small but trembled near the end. Damien didn't push. He nodded gently, keeping his voice warm. "It's all right. I was just asking." She looked up again, this time directly at him, and in that brief moment, her gaze pleaded without words. "Please don't say more. Don't make me explain. Don't make me fragile." A few minutes later, he saw her near the dumpster out back, cap pulled low over her face, hands trembling as she opened a half-eaten sandwich left behind at table 7. She took a bite, fast and small, like she was afraid of catching herself. When he stepped closer, she jolted, the sandwich falling from her hand, eyes wide with panic. "I'm not stealing," she said almost instantly. No pause, like a mantra rehearsed to survive. "I know," Damien said softly. She swallowed hard. "Trent stopped letting staff eat shift meals. It's been months. I can't afford food. My mom's sick. I send most of my paycheck home. I can still eat, but she can't." Damien only nodded. No lecture, no questions, no judgment, not as a boss, just as a person. because he understood people don't eat out of the trash because they lack morals. They do it because they've run out of choices between hunger and dignity. That night, Damien didn't sleep. He couldn't. The image of Rachel beside the dumpster replayed in his head like a stuck reel. He thought of the company's slogans once printed on employee shirts. "We serve families, not just food." He remembered laughing at it, thinking it sounded too cliché. But tonight, it hit like a slap. If his company wasn't decent enough to feed the decent people who worked there, then it wasn't a company worth keeping. Near midnight, the Rusty Fork diner sank into a heavy exhaustion. The familiar clatter of a working restaurant, cutlery clinking, receipt printers buzzing, fryer oil crackling, now lingered only as a faint echo in Damien's mind, like the aftershock of a storm. Most of the lights had been dimmed, leaving only a faint yellow glow spilling from the side kitchen into the rear hallway. Every time someone passed through, their shadow stretched long and silent across the wall, like ghosts of people who'd stayed quiet too long. Damien washed the last round of dishes in a sink full of water that had turned from brown to gray. He could feel the skin on his knuckles beginning to crack from the industrial soap. A wave of stillness came over him as he remembered a budget report that had landed on his desk 3 months earlier. Cutting maintenance, cutting training, cutting even the personal hygiene supply budget. No direct impact on service quality. That's what it said, and he had signed off on it. Then came a sound, small, almost imperceptible, that made Damien pause. Not a voice, not a clatter from the kitchen, just the soft crinkle of a plastic bag, barely audible. But in the silence, it rang like a cry for help buried under layers of noise. He dried his hands on his shirt and stepped out the back door. The same spot where he'd seen Rachel call her mother the night before. The cold hit his face like a slap of clarity. Behind the restaurant, the dumpster area was fenced in with worn wooden planks, a place for everything unfit for the system: garbage bags, expired sauces, leftover scraps, and sometimes people. Rachel was crouched beneath the sickly yellow light of a single bulb. Her shadow curled behind her, hunched into the oversized hoodie she wore like armor. In her hands was half a sandwich, the other half still wrapped in torn foil. One hand held the sandwich, the other balanced a coffee lid she used as a makeshift plate. The sandwich was soggy, the cheese stiff like plastic, but she still took a bite. She looked around as she did, eyes wide with fear, like a creature trained to hide. But Damien saw her. He didn't speak at first. He stood still, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed somewhere near her, but never directly, because looking straight at her might have felt like judgment. But she saw him, and the fear on her face flashed like lightning. I'm not stealing," she blurted, almost instinctively. "I swear. I didn't take it from the kitchen, just from a table nobody cleared. I waited until all the guests left. I know the rules. I didn't break them." "Rachel," Damien said softly, raising a hand like calming a startled animal. "I'm not here to scold you." She stared for a second, unsure, then pressed her lips tight. She set the sandwich down and folded the foil over it, as if trying to hide something shameful. Her gaze dropped from defensive to ashamed, like she herself was the thing that needed to be covered. "I was just hungry," she said, voice low as the wind. "No one gives us meals anymore. They say there's no budget, no shift meals, no support. I do 3 shifts a week. They cut the rest. My mom's on oxygen. I send her everything I can. Groceries aren't enough. So I—" The sentence faded, not because she stopped, but because her throat closed. Damien wasn't sure if her eyes were wet or if it was just the cold. But he knew. This wasn't about hunger anymore. It was about humiliation, slow and prolonged. He took a quiet step closer and sat down beside her. Not too close, just close enough not to be threatening. And they sat there, in the cold, in the trash, in the dark. 2 strangers framed together by the injustice of a broken system. "I used to sleep in a food truck for a year when I opened my first diner," Damien said, voice steady, not comforting. Just honest. "I ate raw eggs because I couldn't afford propane. Once, I picked up half a hot dog someone left behind at a gas station." Rachel turned toward him, eyes still cautious. I know what it feels like when people look at you like you're filth for eating something discarded, he continued. But what they don't understand is no one chooses that. People just choose to survive another day. Silence lingered. Then she exhaled, barely audible. Almost unconsciously, she picked up the half sandwich again, wrapped it carefully, and tucked it into her hoodie. Not to eat, just to keep. A quiet reminder that she hadn't broken today. Thank you, she whispered, so soft Damien almost didn't hear it. But he didn't need to respond. He just nodded, stood up, and went back inside. That dinner was never on the Rusty Fork menu, but it was the meal that kept a CEO up all night. Not from hunger, but from shame. Shame that he once believed a system could run on trust and payroll alone. Shame that he had let a girl like Rachel survive on the edges of his vision for this long. Shame that he had once called this a job. 3 days in, Damien Cross no longer felt like he was undercover. He didn't feel like an observer or someone infiltrating. He felt like he was being swallowed whole. And the thing that scared him most wasn't the hot grease or the dull knives. It was how disturbingly familiar everything had become, as if he himself had laid the first bricks to build this place. A place that, from the outside, he might now call a quiet hell. The morning shift started with something small. Luis Vega, the young grill cook Damien had seen wincing every time he flipped a patty, came in with his right hand wrapped in haphazard layers of clear tape. No gauze, no medical bandage. Just 3 loops of sticky plastic, like patching up a broken toy. His wrist was swollen, red. Damien asked quietly, "What happened?" Luis shrugged. "Burned it frying yesterday. Grease splashed. It's normal." Damien didn't believe it was normal, but Luis said it with the tone of someone who genuinely thought it was. Like someone who'd had a toothache for so long, the pain felt like part of his jaw. That afternoon, when a canceled order left behind untouched fried chicken and fries, the food was taken to the back prep area, supposed to be discarded. Damien watched closely. According to company policy, a policy he had once written, food in safe condition should be boxed and donated to the local food bank. But instead, Trent, with a kind of lazy cruelty, dumped the whole tray straight into a black trash bag. "Liability," he muttered. "If someone gets sick, who's paying for that?" No one questioned him, not a single glance of concern. It felt like a ritual, routine and unchallenged. Damien walked back to the prep station and saw Rachel peeling potatoes silently, saying nothing. But he knew she had seen it, and she was peeling something that would never reach people like her mother. When payday came, everyone received their wage breakdowns. Damien got his, under the name Danny Cruz, and immediately noticed something wrong. On the stub, a $12 deduction for a new uniform he never received, another $6 for equipment damage he never caused. Over $25 lost, a small number in a boardroom, but an entire week's worth of food for someone like Rachel. He asked around. Another employee, Marcus, shook his head and gave a hollow chuckle. "We're used to it. Every month there's a surprise charge. Sometimes it's AC repair, sometimes floor polish refill. Last month it was a missing spoon fee." The last one was said like a joke, but no one laughed. They just shrugged. No one filed complaints, because complaining meant losing shifts, and losing shifts meant not surviving. Damien sat in the employee break room during the lull, eating a cold sandwich with bacon so dry it felt like newspaper. Rachel was there too, 2 seats away, eyes focused on a worn-out notebook. He asked gently, "What are you writing?" She didn't look up. "Expenses," a clipped response. No energy for politeness, no breath to explain. He smiled awkwardly. "Careful, they'll probably charge you a pen fee next payday." She didn't laugh, but for the first time in 4 days, he saw something. The faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Barely there, but real. Later that afternoon, Rachel approached him. "Have you noticed the tip amount being off?" Damien blinked. She continued, "Last night I counted around $38, but this morning only $24 got split. When I asked, they said card reader glitched or the manager rebalanced for fairness. But no one actually saw any of the difference." She opened her notebook, pointing to tiny, precise numbers. Every week, I lose at least $12 to $15. That's enough to buy Mom's meds. Enough for gas. Damien nodded. He had suspected. Now he knew. Trent wasn't just rude. He was skimming. Just enough, just consistently, to avoid notice. Not enough to spark a lawsuit, but enough to crush what little hope the team had left. That night, after everyone had clocked out, Damien lingered in the prep area, pretending to clean. He heard faint shuffling inside the office. He moved quietly, cracked the door, and saw Trent, alone, counting stacks of small bills. Fast, efficient, like he'd done it 1,000 times. No register, no ledger, no legitimate reason. Trent pulled out a bundle of 20s, tucked them into his inner shirt pocket, and patted his chest with an unconscious flick. Like muscle memory. Damien turned away. Not out of fear of being caught, but because if he watched a second longer, he might not be able to stop himself. Back at the prep counter, rag in hand, his heart pounding with fury, Damien remembered the promise he'd once written in the very first employee handbook when opening his flagship branch. We are a family. Everyone will be seen, heard, and fairly paid. Now, people like Rachel weren't seen, Luis wasn't heard, and everyone was being paid in silence. Friday nights were always the worst at Rusty Fork Maple Hill, not because it was the busiest or because orders were overwhelming, but because that was when employees realized they were reliving the same exhausting cycle again. Sweat, grease, and silence so deep it became instinct. Damien, still in the skin of Danny Cruz, had now spent nearly a week living as one of them. And the longer he stayed under this thin veil of disguise, the clearer it became that the rot wasn't in expired food or grease-slick floors. It was in the way people here accepted being suffocated without making a sound. But not everyone accepted it. Dana Kim was one of those people, one of the very few, maybe the only one, who still held on to something like faith in human dignity, even as this place tried to erase that belief from her every single day. Dana wasn't a senior manager. She was just a shift lead. Delegated authority by Trent whenever he was too busy napping in the office or chain smoking behind the parking lot. But she did more than anyone. Coordinating the kitchen, stepping in to clean when short-staffed, handling angry customers, double-checking orders for Rachel, and even driving Luis to the hospital 2 weeks ago when he got burned. Something Trent hadn't even bothered to acknowledge. Damien had been watching Dana since day one, and something about her reminded him of a mother who wasn't allowed to look tired. Someone holding together a crumbling structure, not because she believed in the system, but because she believed the people inside it still deserved to be treated decently. That night, after the chaos finally lulled for a few rare minutes, Dana walked into the office. At first, it was just the sound of typing, but then her voice began to rise. No longer the contained, efficient tone Damien had grown used to. It was the voice of someone who had finally reached their limit. Trent, you can't keep cutting people's hours, then doubling their workload and calling it optimization. This isn't an assembly line. These are human beings. There was no response at first. Then Trent let out a short, dismissive laugh. The kind that cuts more than it jokes. What, you think I'm some robot? I'm tired too. I've got KP is shoved down my throat. Everyone's suffering. Don't bring your morality parade in here. Dana didn't back down. Luis got burned and received no medical help. Abby's been cut off from staff meals. Marcus is missing tip money. I talked to 4 employees about their paychecks. All of them had unexplained deductions. I've submitted reports. No one answers. You call this running a system? You know who signs your paycheck? Trent's voice dropped into something sharper, like a blade being drawn. I do, and I don't need anyone in this kitchen preaching to me. You don't have to listen to me, Dana replied, her voice eerily calm. But you should look around. People are falling apart. And if you can't see that, then you're not a manager. You're morally blind. Maybe that was the last straw, because seconds later, the office door flung open so hard the hinge let out a crack, as if it too objected to whatever had just happened inside. Dana stepped out first. Her face was flushed, eyes bright but wet, not from tears but from choosing truth over safety. Behind her, Trent stormed out, jaw clenched, shirt wrinkled, collar open. He stopped when he saw Damien by the sink, wiping down a baking tray. That look, cold, sharp, cut through Damien like a scalpel. For a brief moment, it felt like the mask had been peeled away. But Trent said nothing, just smirked. "Get back to work, Danny. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." That sentence wasn't just for Damien. It was for everyone in the kitchen. A warning, a slogan, a commandment from the culture of silence Trent had built and enforced. Dana walked straight into the storage room, the door swinging shut behind her like a punctuation mark. The entire kitchen froze for a few seconds, long enough for everyone to hear their own breathing. But then, as if by cue, the world resumed. Knives kept chopping, oil kept boiling, tickets kept printing. No one spoke. No one dared to. And in that moment, Damien realized something deeper than outrage. Cruelty isn't just in the act. It's in punishing courage. Dana had spoken for everyone, and yet she was left to fight alone. And he, the man who once called this company a family, had let the roof rot so badly that warmth no longer lived under it. Saturday night. No rain, but the sky hung low. Thick, gray, like a warning whispered just above the rooftops. Outside the Rusty Fork diner, dim yellow light flickered through the chipped sign, reflecting onto the sidewalk like a fever that wouldn't break. Inside, the kitchen was running at full tilt, but not a word was spoken. Damien Cross washed his hands for the 6th time in less than an hour. Every rinse felt like an attempt to scrub the weight off his chest. Every rinse reminded him, don't break character. Just watch. Just listen. Just understand. But since Rachel walked out, something inside him had cracked, and he couldn't just watch anymore. The dinner rush was peaking. Order slips poured out, commands flooding the screen, the kitchen bell ringing nonstop. Everyone moved like they were trapped in a trance. Louis still flipping patties with his injured wrist, Marcus bussing tables, the corners of his paycheck stub folded in his pocket. Dana no longer holding her clipboard, just biting her lip, clocking time like it hurt. And then, Rachel came back. No one saw her enter. No dramatic music. No gust of wind. Just a moment. Damien was bending over the prep station, reaching for a tray of salad. And when he looked up, she was there. Sneakers soaked, uniform wrinkled, her blonde hair tied back with a frayed string. She looked like she had never left, but her eyes were not the same. Rachel said nothing. She simply picked up a half-finished water tray, stepped softly through the kitchen, and resumed working, as if nothing had ever happened. But it had, and everyone knew it. An hour later, the inevitable happened. A customer sent back a plate, too salty. The dish had to be remade. Rachel was the one delivering it. When she returned, she moved faster than usual. On her tray, 3 glasses of ice water, 2 sodas. As she reached the order station, her foot slid slightly. The floor hadn't been mopped. The tray tilted. Glasses fell. The crash echoed like a slap across the tile. Everything froze. Trent appeared, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment all night. No one called him. No one needed to. He was there, right when the water spilled beneath Rachel's shoes. "Are you stupid?" he snapped. Not to control the moment, but to punish. "You think those glasses are free? You think this is your house to mess around in?" Rachel didn't respond. Her hands trembled, but she didn't kneel, didn't scramble. She just stood there, like someone who had nothing left to flinch for. "You're paying for that, off the clock, half your shift gone, and forget about this week's tips." Someone nearby, Marcus, stepped back. Not because of the water, but because something deeper, something invisible, had just cracked open in the kitchen air. Rachel inhaled, deeply, then lifted her head, and this time her voice wasn't scared of being fired. "You don't have the right." Trent blinked. The kitchen went dead silent. Rachel walked toward him, each step small but steady. Water dripped from her shoes in rhythm. Her hands still shook, but her eyes did not. "I'm not apologizing, not because I'm right, but because I don't owe you my silence anymore." Trent scoffed. "What, playing hero now? Who the hell are you here?" Rachel didn't blink. I'm the one who cleaned up your vomit last week, the one who picked up extra shifts when others called out, the one who got $24 in tips when it should have been $38, the one who ate a sandwich off a customer's tray because my mom needed her meds more than I needed dinner. Trent rolled his eyes, ready to turn away, but she wasn't finished. I am the voice of every person here who's had hours cut, who's had pay docked without explanation, who's been treated like a tool instead of a human. And if I don't say something tonight, the rest will keep thinking that silence is survival. But it's not. It's how you die slowly, every single day. The kitchen didn't move. Marcus let go of his dish. Luis stepped away from the grill. Dana exhaled, softly, like someone else had finally said what she hadn't dared to. Trent flinched, but before he could snap back, Rachel removed her apron. Her hand still trembled, but she folded it neatly, placed it on the counter, like a final offering to a faith that no longer lived. You can't lead with fear. You can't buy silence with hunger. You can't hold this company together by draining the life out of the people who built it. She turned to leave. As she passed Damien, she looked him directly in the eye. And in that look, there was nothing left to prove. Only this. She had stood up, and no one, not even the Undercover CEO, could unsee it. She pushed open the back door. Wind swept in. Then the door closed, quietly, like a breeze. But inside Damien, it slammed shut like a verdict. A good person had just stood up, and the entire system shuddered. 2 days had passed since Rachel walked out of Rusty Fork with soaked shoes and unblinking courage. But the echoes of what she left behind still hadn't faded. She was gone, but her absence was felt as clearly as an empty chair at a family dinner, or an old pair of slippers still resting on the porch after their owner has left for good. No one dared speak her name, but everyone thought of her. Damien, or more accurately, CEO Damien Cross, hadn't slept that night. He sat alone in his cheap motel room near the truck yard, his greasy uniform draped over a chair, staring at the logo stitched onto the chest. Rusty Fork, a family place. Since 1982, a slogan that now sounded like mockery. At 5:15 a.m. the next morning, he arrived at the diner, earlier than usual, not to prep the kitchen, but to prepare for a decision he'd spent a week avoiding. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. And if Rachel could stand up in front of everyone, then he, with all his power, reputation, and history, had no excuse to stay silent. By midday, after the lunch rush had finally simmered down, the kitchen entered its brief ceasefire mode. Fewer order calls, the ovens cooling down, everyone catching their breath. And then Damien stepped forward, right into the middle of the kitchen, climbing onto a plastic crate near the pass line, the spot Trent usually reserved for commanding. For the first time in days, the entire kitchen looked at him at once. "Give me a minute," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear, calm. Not a demand, not a plea, just a request. And somehow it was enough to make everyone stop. Dana looked up from the sink. Luis froze mid-wipe at the grill. Marcus halted mid-move, halfway placing a tray on the rack. Trent, leaning against the office doorway, crossed his arms, smirking with thinly veiled contempt. Damien took a breath, one last time, then slowly removed his kitchen uniform, the stained shirt, the missing button, the grease on the collar. Underneath it, a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up neatly. On his left hand, a worn silver ring, the Cross family ring he only wore in executive meetings. The kitchen held its breath. "My name is not Danny Cruz," he said. "I'm Damien Cross, founder of Rusty Fork." No one moved. Somewhere, a spoon clinked to the ground. No one bent to pick it up. "I didn't come here for a reality show stunt. I'm not here to shock anyone. I came because I felt something was wrong, and I was right." He looked at each of them, not past them, not over their heads, at them, as if returning a gaze they hadn't received in a very long time. In less than a week, I saw Luis working with an injured wrist and no relief, Marcus losing tips to some mystery glitch, Dana being threatened for standing up for others, and Rachel, whom I believe you still remember, eating leftover food to keep enough energy to serve customers in a restaurant that bears my name. Trent took a step forward. So what? This is pathetic, Damien. What, you gonna post a PR video now? Damien didn't look at him. He looked at everyone else. Number, this isn't for a camera. This is the beginning of something new. He finally turned toward Trent. His voice didn't rise, but every word sliced with surgical precision. You've been skimming tip money, canceling staff meals, docking pay with no explanation, throwing away good food instead of donating it. You've silenced the good people and pushed the vulnerable out, all under the name of performance efficiency. Trent stepped forward again, red-faced but silent. You're fired, Damien said, effective immediately. Silence. Trent opened his mouth. You've got no proof. I'll sue you for wrongful termination. Damien pulled out his phone. One tap. The recording played. Trent's voice 2 days ago, snapping at Dana. You keep pushing me. I'll just find someone else who knows how to shut up. Then Rachel's voice. My mom needs medication more than I need a meal. Damien stopped the recording. I don't need more. The whole kitchen heard it. They are witnesses. And if I have to take this to court, I will. You want it on the news? Even better. Let the country see what managing by fear looks like. Trent took a step back. Get your things. Leave. And don't come back. Trent scanned the room, looking for allies. No one met his eye. Luis looked down. Dana stood tall. Marcus tilted his head, eyes unreadable. Trent grabbed his bag, marched to the door. No words. But before he stepped out, he turned, his eyes darting past Damien, pausing on Dana. He didn't say anything, but the smirk he left behind, cold, thin, wasn't a farewell. It was a threat that didn't need words. The door shut. The lock clicked, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. Damien turned back toward the kitchen. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dana stepped forward. She nodded. Once. Marcus clapped first. Once. Then Luis. Then the rest of the kitchen. Not in unison. Not like a movie, but real. A scattered ripple of applause. Unpolished. Unrehearsed, but unmistakable. Because it was applause for a man who finally faced the truth and chose to fix it. Monday. The air at Rusty Fork felt different. Not because the AC had finally been fixed. Not because the food tasted better or the schedules had changed, but because something in the way people looked at each other had changed. Trent was gone. No farewell, no send-off. Just a printed notice taped to the office door in bold black ink. Terminated employees are not permitted to return to this facility under any circumstances. Damien was there early, no longer in disguise. White shirt, dark khakis, still Damien Cross, but this time not standing at a podium or behind a corporate desk. He stood at the sink, wiping down prep stations alongside Luis. A new hire asked, "Are you really the CEO?" Damien smiled. "I used to think I was, but now I'm trying something else. The kind of CEO who knows exactly where the grease spot on the tray came from." But despite the changes underway, one thing still wasn't right. Rachel hadn't come back. She wasn't answering texts or calls. Dana had even gone to her apartment, a third-floor walk-up in an aging complex off Cotton Street. The woman in the downstairs unit said, "The blonde girl? Thinks she's working mornings now at the cafe across from the hospital." She shook her head. "Poor thing. Been walking everywhere this week. Guess she sold her car." Damien felt a knot tighten in his throat, not because she'd left, but because she had endured so much, quietly, gracefully, and had been hurt by the very system he had built. He didn't want to send flowers. He didn't want to write "I'm sorry," because he knew apologies weren't enough. On the third day after his unmasking, Damien gathered the staff before opening. For the first time in years, a team meeting was held without KPI charts or PowerPoint slides. Just people, in a circle, looking each other in the eyes. "We didn't just lose a coworker," Damien began. "We lost a part of this place's soul." He paused, scanning the room. No blinking. Rachel doesn't need pity, but she needs to know that if she ever comes back, this place really is different. Not just because the manager changed, but because we changed in how we see each other, treat each other. Dana gave a subtle nod. Luis clenched his fist. Marcus exhaled slowly. No one spoke, but their eyes were no longer blank and tired. Now they held something else: solidarity and resolve. Back in the office, Damien sat with Dana and Marcus to rebuild the entire scheduling and payroll structure. Unjust deductions? Eliminated. Tip distribution? Now transparent, based on per-shift revenue, not vague math. No more uniform charges. Staff meals? Officially reinstated. One hot, balanced meal per shift. Anyone working over 6 hours? Paid 20-minute break, mandatory. He also signed off on reinstating the community plate program. Leftover food in good condition would be boxed and donated to local food banks. No one would get fired for taking home a spare sandwich anymore. In fact, they'd be offered one, boxed and labeled with care. But even as the system began to rebuild, Damien knew there was still one thing left to do, the most important one: find Rachel. He drove to the cafe across from the hospital, as the neighbor had mentioned. A modest shop, walls painted in faded seafoam green, the hand-painted sign barely legible: Cup of Kindness, coffee with a cause. He stepped inside. Behind the counter, Rachel was facing away, steaming a latte. White t-shirt, blonde hair tied in a soft bun. Still her, but different. Not hunched, not guarded. Peaceful, but distant. Damien didn't order. He didn't move. Just stood, watching. She turned and, startled to see him, he stepped forward. No CEO title. No contracts in hand. Just his eyes. Sincere. Unpolished. "I know you don't need an apology," he began, voice barely above a whisper. "And I know you don't need to return to a place that once hurt you." Rachel said nothing, but she didn't turn away. Her hand gently tightened around the coffee cup. "But we need you, not to serve food, but to help rebuild a culture you should have never been pushed out of." A pause. Then Rachel asked, not bitter, not soft, just honest, "Is it really different now?" Damien nodded. "Not a promise. Action. You'll return as supervisor in training. You'll learn management. From Dana, from me, and from yourself. You'll be paid what you deserve. And no one gets to make you feel small again." Rachel looked at him. Her gaze wasn't glowing, but calm, like someone who didn't want miracles, only the dignity of being treated as she should have been all along. "I'll think about it," she said. Damien smiled. "I don't need your answer today. I just need you to know the door is open, and this time no one gets to close it on you." 2 days later, Rachel returned to Rusty Fork. No one hugged her. No one clapped. But when she stepped into the kitchen, Dana handed her a fresh clipboard. Luis nodded. Marcus murmured, "Welcome home." And as Rachel walked past the sink, she saw Damien there, not in a dress shirt, but back in his old uniform, cloth in hand. "Today," he said, "you're not on kitchen duty. You're observing, learning, and rewriting the HR protocol with me." Rachel nodded, and for the first time since it all began, she smiled. Rachel's first morning back at Rusty Fork didn't come with applause. No welcome banners, no photos on social media celebrating the diner's positive transformation, just a fresh clipboard handed to her by Dana. A new name tag, plain and unassuming: Rachel Monroe, supervisor in training, and a simple nod from Damien, standing a few steps away, silent but with a calm gaze that said, "Today you don't stand behind anyone anymore." Rachel didn't say much. She bowed her head in greeting. Marcus answered with a subtle but genuine smile. Lewis gave a small wave with his still bandaged wrist. A new hire, a 19-year-old named Jalen, quietly stepped aside to let her take his spot at the pass line without being asked. She hadn't returned to be a server. She returned to rebuild the warmth this restaurant once had. The first thing Rachel did wasn't to review schedules. She didn't head to the office or check time cards. She walked straight into the kitchen. At every station, she asked a simple question: "Have you eaten anything today?" Luis shrugged with a tired smile. "Does coffee count as food?" Rachel nodded. "No, but if it does, I'll swap your coffee for a sandwich, at the very least." And she did just that. She ducked into the prep area, rummaged through the staff fridge, and brought out a neatly wrapped veggie sandwich and a ripe banana. Nothing fancy, but it had thought behind it. human hands, care. At the order station, Jalen was struggling with a ticket, a mix-up in toppings. Rachel didn't scold him, didn't correct him. She simply said, "Next time, make sure no pickles is the first thing you write." I used to mess up those same tickets. No one died. And look, I'm still here. Jalen smiled, for the first time that day. Around noon, Rachel stood beside Dana reviewing the upcoming shift schedule. Dana was about to assign Marcus extra hours. He rarely says no, but Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "When you divide the work, don't assign more to the quiet ones. Assign it to those who need it and can actually handle it." Dana paused. Then she adjusted the schedule. 2 women, no official titles, no executive power, quietly rewriting what fairness looked like in a diner once written off as broken. Around 2 p.m., when the lunch wave had passed, Rachel spotted a longtime staff member, Maria, slumped at the bar. She walked over, didn't ask too much, just sat beside her, slid over a packet of tissues. Maria said, "I'm sorry, I'm just tired, that's all." Rachel replied, "Being tired is a valid reason to sit, and if anyone says otherwise, they can answer to me." Maria didn't cry after that. She sat a few minutes longer, then returned to the kitchen. But her eyes were different. No longer afraid, no longer resigned to being just another head count. Damien stood nearby, watching from the sink area, not interfering, just observing. And in that moment, he realized what Rachel was doing didn't appear in any job description, but it was exactly what the system needed to heal. She wasn't giving speeches. She didn't write out a vision, mission, culture draft, but every action stitched back cracks he had once overlooked. Because he'd never stood at the sink long enough, never eaten a cold sandwich out of a trash bin, never felt his hands shake after losing a shift. At the end of the shift, Rachel returned to the office. Damien was there with Dana, waiting. "I want to propose something," Rachel said. "Go ahead," Damien replied. "We should have a silent board," she said, placing a blank sheet of paper on the table, "where each person can write down the name of someone they saw doing something kind that week. No explanations, no need to sign it. Just a way to let someone know they weren't invisible." Dana nodded quietly. Damien smiled. "Do you realize that idea is good enough to become company policy across the whole system?" Rachel shrugged. "I just thought, if someone had let me know I wasn't invisible, maybe I wouldn't have had to eat a sandwich behind the dumpster." She said it gently. No blame. But Damien had no reply, only a nod. And then he picked up a marker and wrote the first line on the newly mounted whiteboard by the door. "Maria, for showing up, even when she was tired, and for coming back." At the end of the day, Rachel removed her name tag and placed it on the desk. She didn't need it to prove she was a supervisor in training. Everyone in the diner already knew. She was the first person to retrain this place in what kindness looked like. Not through policy, not through ISO standards, but with a glance, with a sandwich, with being there, exactly when someone needed it, and never asking for thanks. 6 weeks after Rachel Monroe returned to Rusty Fork, the atmosphere in the diner, and in Damien himself, had changed entirely. Sunday morning, the air in Ohio was crisp, but soft sunlight fell across the red-tiled kitchen floor, coating the space in a gentle golden warmth. No one was in a rush. No one was tense. Louise chuckled as Dana sliced the bread the wrong way. Marcus teased Jalen, "If a customer asks for water a third time, I'm buying you breakfast, and I'm paying." Rachel stood at the order station, reviewing a ticket. Her hair was tied back neatly, her face calm. She still wore the same old shoes, but the way she stood, grounded, with presence, subtly shifted the posture of everyone around her. No one had to be told. Damien walked in. No need to pretend, no uniform. But today he wore the same pale beige shirt he had worn during his undercover week. A reminder of the kitchen smell, the grease stains, and everything he had missed from the comfort of the executive floor. He didn't give a speech. He didn't send a company-wide email. He simply walked over to the whiteboard on the wall, the thank you board Rachel had once proposed. The first note was still there. Maria, for showing up even when tired. Underneath it, dozens of handwritten messages. Luis, for swapping shifts when my foot hurt. Dana, for asking if I drank water. Jalen, for saying, "Are you okay?" right when I needed it. None of them were grand gestures, but they were the things that made this place something close to family. That day, Damien opened his laptop in the back office. He wrote a single email. Subject line, "A new standard starts here." Sent to the entire Rusty Fork system. All 27 locations, 7 regional leads, 2 corporate offices. No PowerPoint, no budget sheets, just a first line. "If we need a report to tell us how our people are doing, we don't deserve to lead them." In the message, he announced a new policy. Every senior executive, every regional manager, every investor, from the CEO to the CFO, would be required to work 1 full week each year at a restaurant location. Not to ground the brand, but to listen, wash dishes, wipe tables, and breathe in the real life of the system. No exceptions. Not a PR move, a moral obligation. The final note in the email was a quote from Rachel, framed and hung in Damien's office. "Kindness doesn't need a budget, it just needs to show up at the right time for the right person." 3 days later, Rachel received an email inviting her to the internal leadership training program. She opened it, read it, and closed it. Not because she was rejecting it, but because she needed time. She didn't need to prove she was worthy, she already had. What she needed was a workplace that didn't just see her talent, but helped her see herself more clearly. That afternoon, she spent an hour in the dry storage room, checking expiration dates on sauces, vegetables, and pasta. No one had asked her to, but she knew. If the kitchen was clean, the customers didn't need a PR campaign to believe in it. A week later, Rusty Fork held a small celebration. No banners, no stage, just a long table with tacos, lemonade, and soft jazz humming from a dented Bluetooth speaker. Dana said a few words, but everyone knew. The person they were honoring was Rachel, the woman who had gone from the invisible one to the light guiding them forward. At the end of the event, Damien approached her with a small card. No spotlight, no announcement. "I signed off on the internal scholarship fund," he said quietly. "It's called the Rachel Fund, for staff who want to study management, but once thought they didn't deserve the chance." Rachel froze. She didn't cry. She simply inhaled, holding the card like a map to somewhere new, a place she had once thought unreachable. That evening, the diner closed 15 minutes early. No one complained. They wanted those extra minutes, not to hold a meeting, but to sit together in silence. Rachel stood at the thank you board, adding one more note. "Damien, for stepping down far enough to meet us at eye level." Damien read it. He didn't say anything, but outside, through the still cracked door, a cool breeze blew in, carrying with it a strange warmth. Not from the sun, but from people who had once been forgotten, now rebuilding this place with their hands, their eyes, and their hearts. You see, you don't need a revolution to change a workplace. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to turn away. A girl who once ate scraps behind a dumpster, now coaching future managers. A man who was once called the new guy, who changed an entire system, and a restaurant everyone thought was rotting, now stands as proof of something beautifully simple. Kindness doesn't need a budget. It just needs someone brave enough to go first. As someone who's consulted on organizational culture for hundreds of businesses, I can say this with certainty. Nothing transforms faster than a workplace where employees feel seen, and nothing decays faster than one where leaders stop listening. So if a discarded sandwich could spark an entire cultural rebirth, the real question is, how many Rachels at your workplace are still unseen? Drop a comment below. What did this story awaken in you? Have you ever been a Rachel or a Damien? Or maybe you were a Trent without realizing it? If you believe the quietest people deserve to be recognized first, like this video, subscribe, share it with a coworker who needs to be heard, and never forget, you don't need power to create change. You just have to be willing not to stay silent.